I'm joined now by Sir Keir Starmer, the Labour leader. Sir Keir, thanks for joining Times Radio this afternoon. I think I'm right in saying you've just finished 11 hours of travel from your meeting with Volodymyr Zelensky yesterday to reach the Polish border.
Yeah, we're just literally just arrived. Got off the train about 2 hours ago. It's a long old journey from Kiev to the border. And in Kiev, I was able to speak to President Zelensky yesterday and to various Ukrainian communities, and say to him firsthand, firstly, that the political unity in support of Ukraine is as strong now as it was a year ago. It's obviously the anniversary of the conflict, the 1 year anniversary next week. But also, importantly, to say to him face to face that should there be a change of government next year, because we will have a general election, he understands that, that there'll be no change in our position of support for Ukraine. And it was very important for me to say that to him and to the other communities that we met in the outskirts of Kyiv. I met neighbours in areas where there had been the most awful atrocities in the early days of the conflict, and saw for myself firsthand the images of civilians blindfolded with their hands tied behind their backs and shot in the head and left in the road, who the people I was talking to had to gather up and put into a mass grave next to the church that we were talking at. And it was very harrowing, very humbling, and a hugely important reminder of why we have to support Ukraine in this conflict, why Putin has to be defeated. I also saw residential blocks that had been very severely damaged, with families in them that need rebuilding. So it was very powerful and important to meet President Zelensky, but equally just to see firsthand and see the places where those images had come from, and talk to the people who are their friends, their colleagues and their community. And they've got a burning sense of justice, that there's got to be individual accountability for this. But also Russia has to pay for the rebuilding of Ukraine. So very powerful set of meetings and exchanges in the last 36 hours or so.
You mentioned that Russia being held to account in terms of funding the reconstruction of Ukraine. There is a private members bill that's been entered into Parliament suggesting that the frozen assets that have been seized from Russian oligarchs with links to President Putin, that money should be requisitioned and used to fund the Ukraine reconstruction. Would you support that?
Yes, I would, and President Zelensky raised that with me directly. The residents in the communities raised that with me because they feel, as you can imagine, very strongly. This is not a war that they wanted, and not a war that they started. They've suffered awful atrocities. Of course, they want individual accountability. They absolutely do. The people who did the blindfolding and the shooting in the head of innocent civilians must be brought to justice. But they also have got to rebuild their country, and they absolutely speak with one voice. Russia must pay. And there are those assets, as you rightly say, that could be used. So I would support that private members bill. I hope the government would support it as well. Literally, what I've been trying to do, and very careful on this trip and over the last 12 months, is not to cause a political divide on any issue. So I will try to encourage the government and support the government down this road. But I'm not trying to do political point scoring here. I'm reflecting what residents in the outskirts of Kyiv said to me yesterday afternoon as they talk me through their story. They were, it's a very straightforward. They've got residential blocks that have been bombed, that are gutted. They've got families that were living in there, and they need to rebuild them. They are incredibly resilient and courageous. They're trying to go about their lives as best they can. They know that every day that they can work and bring a degree of normality is a better day for Ukraine, but they need money to do it. And they are very straightforward. These are assets that are being frozen. They should be used as compensation so that the work can start now. It's a very powerful case.
Now, you've just been to Ukraine. I know you were on your way to the Munich Security Conference, one of the biggest annual meetings of global leaders to talk about defence and security. I know travel plans have stopped you getting.
Munich Airport is on strike, so that scuppered our plans as we got over the border.
But clearly, you're focusing on defence and security this week. Clearly, there has been a lot that Labour's needed to do to rebuild public trust after the Corbyn era, when there was a lot of doubt about Jeremy Corbyn's commitment to the British forces, the intelligence services, and national security as a whole. Do you think you have done enough to win back public trust on this?
Well, I hope so, Lucy. I mean, we, after all, were the party that founded or helped found NATO. It was a Labour government that supported NATO, and we've always supported NATO in all the intervening years. And our support now is as unshakable as it was when a Labour government signed on the dotted line when NATO was set up in the first place. It's why I went out to Estonia last year to visit our forces on the border. Actually, there again, Estonia very worried about its own border with Russia, and I think and I hope that we've made it absolutely clear that the Labour Party is not a party of protest; it's a party of patriotism and public service.
So let's talk about defence spending. We know behind the scenes there's a lot of wrangling between Ben Wallace and Jeremy Hunt ahead of the budget. Ben Wallace pushing for up to 11 billion more for the Ministry of Defence. Do you support that push?
Well, look, we'll see what the government puts forward in its budget, as we always do. I do think that the government has hollowed out our armed forces. I think Ben Wallace thinks that as well. Since the 2019 election, there's been the cutting effectively of 10,000 troops. We wouldn't have done that. I'll have a careful look at what the government brings forward in its budget, but I do think it's time to review that. I also would look again at the integrated review that feels very, very out of date now in terms of where we're going with our defence and security strategy.
Well, the government is itself has reopened the integrated review, so we'll hear from them shortly on that. Can I just pick up on the cut to troop numbers? You say Labour wouldn't have cut 10,000 troops from the British Army. It's going to be 72,500 troops by the end of the Parliament, the smallest size since the Napoleonic era. Would a Labour government reinstate those 10,000 troops?
Well, look, we wouldn't have cut them. So, of course, we will then review it as we come into power. But we've challenged the government uphill and down dale on that over the last few years as they've cut those troops. Because when Ben Wallace himself, I think, has said that the armed force has been hollowed out, and that is the effect of cutting in that way. So we wouldn't have done it. Obviously, what we will do is set out our plans going into the election, and we've said every single proposition that we put on the table will be fully costed. So what we say about this, we'll obviously lay out as we go into the election. But we are going to inherit a very badly damaged economy. And we are not going to make proposals that aren't fully funded. But in answer to the question, would we have cut the 10,000? No, we wouldn't have done.
Not yet guaranteeing that you'll reinstate them, but let's move on. On China, Liz Truss has been out and about today saying that democracies are in danger due to the rise of Beijing. Do you agree?
Well, I don't think Liz Truss is necessarily the right person to pronounce on very much these days, given the damage she's done to our country and to our reputation.
Look, it's a view shared by quite a lot of people in in security circles, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, my position on this, the Labour Party position on this is, look, there are real human rights concerns when it comes to China, real security concerns when it comes to China, and we've got to be alive to them. And I think the Cameron Osborne era of sort of getting much closer to China is now seen as a mistake. So we've got to be really, really tough on that. There is a but, and it's important but, because there are some global issues, climate change would be one of them, where we do have to work on the global stage with all the countries that are available across the world, and that would include China. So very, very strong on human rights abuses, very, very strong on security concerns, and certainly investment concerns from China. But recognising that on some issues, climate change, etc., we do have to work with other countries, and that would include China.
So there have been reports today that the UK and Chinese governments are looking at the possibility of a British minister travelling to China for the first time in 3 years. Would you support that move?
Well, Lucy, you'll probably just have to forgive me on this. I haven't seen, I've literally got off the train. We were without our electronic phones, etc., whilst we were there for understandable security reasons. So I haven't actually seen what the proposal is this morning. So,
But just the idea of James Cleverly going to China to speak with Chinese ministers.
Yeah, look, I mean, I don't know what James Cleverly is proposing, but I will have a look at that. I just haven't seen what the proposed trip is all about.
Well, I'm just going to ask you about one other thing that's developed while you've been in Ukraine, Sakir, which is around Nicola Bully, the missing mother of two. Lancashire police have released to the public that she was suffering with alcohol and with the menopause. There's been a lot of criticism heaped on the police for disclosing this personal information. The Information Commissioner is now going to investigate whether it was really necessary for them to tell the public about that. Obviously, you're a former DPP. What's your take?
Well, two points really. Firstly, as a former DPP, I'm well aware of the difficulties that investigators have when those that don't know the true facts start commenting, and so my general rule is not to get too drawn in. I have to say, I think some of this was just breaking before we crossed the border 2 days ago. I was very surprised to see what the police had put out there. I was not sure why that degree of personal information was necessary. I think I read that they had spoken to the family about it, but I was very surprised. If there is, in the fullness of time, a good justification, then so be it. But I think most people would be very uncomfortable. I certainly felt uncomfortable with that private information being put in the public domain.
And just finally, Nicola Sturgeon's shock resignation has rocked British politics this week. Lots of your colleagues in the Labour Party are cock-a-hoop about the possibility that this could allow Labour to make headway at the next election north of the border. Once a former heartland for Labour, I think you had 41 seats ahead of the 2015 general election. Now you have one. Do you see her departure as a chance for Labour to make a comeback in Scotland?
Well, I think the first thing I should say, Lucy, and I haven't really had a full opportunity to do this yet, is that whilst I disagree with Nicola Sturgeon on many, many things, I do, pay tribute to the conviction of her leadership, and recognise just how tough it is to be at the top in politics, particularly to be a woman at the top in politics, and genuinely wish her well in whatever she does next. I do think it demonstrates that the SNP have run out of road, and that they can't provide the change that Scotland needs. The way I would put it would be that it now falls to Labour to persuade voters in Scotland that under a Labour government we can have a changed and better Scotland in a changed and better United Kingdom. But whether it's in Scotland or anywhere else across the United Kingdom, I'm very clear. Every single vote has to be earned. No single vote will be taken in any way for granted. It's for us to make the case for change in Scotland. I think we can make that case a very powerful case, because I understand why so many people in Scotland want change, why they're absolutely fed up with the Conservatives in Westminster. But the change that I think that the best change we can have for Scotland now is a Labour government at the next general election.
Well, I know we'll hear more from you on this subject on Sunday, I think, when you're going to address the Scottish Labour conference. So Keir Starmer, Labour leader, thanks for joining Times Radio today.